Welcome to Lyra Echo Stories, where every story echoes emotions, memories, and hidden truths. Step in and feel the echo of every tale.
You know the sound your phone makes when it loads a page you were never supposed to see. That small click the screen filling in from top to bottom and your brain doing the math a half second before your eyes catch up. That is what happened to me in my parents' driveway the night after Thanksgiving, sitting in my car with the engine off and the cold already working through the windshield. I was holding the family iPad. I had used it earlier to show my nephew a dinosaur game, and Dennis, my father, had left his email logged in. I was going to close the browser. I was going to hand it back to my mother in the morning and say nothing. But the subject line loaded at the top of his inbox, and my hands went still. Claire's condo. Plan for Renee. The email chain went back 3 weeks. My mother Beverly had been writing to my father in the precise, organized way she planned everything. Holiday menus, church fundraisers, the quiet dismantling of my life. She had pulled my condo's value on Zillow. $310,400, she wrote, underlining it in the email, as if it were a hymnal verse. She had outlined a timeline. Renee and Todd would come for Christmas Eve. They would bring suitcases, then boxes. Beverly would suggest they stay through New Year's, and by mid-January, Renee's kids would be enrolled in the school down the street from my building. My sister's family would be anchored in my 2-bedroom condo in South Minneapolis, like barnacles on a dock post. Once they're in, Claire won't have the nerve to kick them out, Beverly wrote to my father. She never does. I read the chain 3 times. My breath made clouds inside the windshield. The heater had been off for 20 minutes and my fingers were going numb around the edges of the iPad, but I could not put it down. The car ticked as the engine cooled. Somewhere inside the house, my mother was wrapping leftovers in aluminum foil and congratulating herself on a holiday well executed. Further down the chain, I found the part that Beverly had written to Dennis on November 3. Claire has that second bedroom sitting empty. It is practically a crime, Dennis. Renee's kids are sharing a room the size of a closet. She had included a screenshot of the Zillow listing for my address, the photo of my building from the street, and a note at the bottom. If she resists, remind her about Mom's money. She owes this family $310,400. My mother had assigned a dollar value to my home and a strategy for taking it, and she had done it all while smiling at me across the Thanksgiving table and asking if I wanted more gravy. I sat there until my toes went numb, and the windshield frosted over from my breath. Then I drove home. The funny thing about Thanksgiving dinner when I replayed it through the lens of those emails was how obvious it all became. Like watching a play when someone hands you the script and you see every cue, every planted line, every piece of staging you missed the first time through. Beverly had seated me next to Renee. Normally, she put us across from each other. But that night, Renee was right there at my elbow, close enough that I could smell her shampoo and hear every word about the apartment that was too small, the rent that kept climbing, the landlord who would not fix the radiator. Todd sat at the far end of the table saying nothing, which was Todd's primary contribution to most situations. He had been a guitarist in a cover band when Renee married him. The band dissolved and Todd's ambitions dissolved with it, and now he worked part-time at a guitar shop and talked about the music industry like a man describing a country he had visited once and never returned to. "The kids need a yard," Renee had said, sighing into her mashed potatoes. "Our neighborhood doesn't even have a park within walking distance. My condo was 3 blocks from Minnehaha Park. I had chosen it for the running trails." Beverly steered the conversation with the precision of someone parallel parking. "Family takes care of family," she said, passing the gravy boat to Dennis without looking at him. "That is what we do." She looked at me when she said it. Her eyes were warm and steady. Beverly's eyes were always warm when she was working. Dennis kept his gaze on his plate. He had cut his turkey into identical squares the way he did when he was uncomfortable, and he chewed each piece the same number of times. He said nothing through the entire meal about Renee's living situation, and his silence now read as the quiet of a man who already had the solution and was waiting for the machinery to engage. Renee's daughter Lily, who was 4, climbed into my lap after dessert and asked me to show her the dinosaur game on the iPad. I pulled up the app, and while Lily tapped at cartoon stegosauruses, Dennis's email notification popped up in the corner of the screen. I swiped it away without thinking the way you swipe at a fly, and Lily went back to her game. 3 hours later in the driveway, that notification was the reason I opened the browser instead of closing it. After dinner, I loaded the dishwasher while Beverly wrapped leftovers in her methodical way, labeling each container with masking tape and a Sharpie. Renee put the kids to bed in the guest room. The house smelled like turkey grease and cinnamon candles, and the specific scent of my childhood, which was Beverly's hand lotion and the wood polish she used on the banister every Sunday. I carried the iPad to my car because Lily had fallen asleep holding it, and Dennis said I could bring it back another time. I set it on the passenger seat. I started the engine. And then, for a reason I still cannot fully explain, I picked it up and opened the browser, and the email inbox was still there. The drive back to my condo took 35 minutes. Snow was just starting, fat flakes, catching the headlights, and dissolving on the warm hood. I drove with both hands on the wheel, which I never did, and I kept the radio off. My brain was doing what it always did in crisis, cataloging, sorting, filing things in order of severity and actionability. When my ex-husband Joel told me he needed space 2 years into our marriage, my first response was to make a list of questions on a yellow legal pad. How long? Where would he go? What about the lease? Not because I was calm, but because the list kept me from screaming. Joel said that was my problem, my central flaw, the thing that made living with me like living inside a filing cabinet. You organize instead of feeling Claire. He was not wrong about the observation, but organizing kept me alive during the divorce, and it would keep me alive now. At a red light on Lyndale Avenue, I pulled up Zillow on my phone and typed in my address. The estimate loaded. $310, $400. The same number Beverly had written in her email down to the last digit. My mother had been tracking my property value the way some people track stocks, checking regularly, noting fluctuations, waiting for the right moment to make her move. I parked at my building and sat looking up at the windows. Second floor corner unit. The south-facing windows were dark. I had bought this condo when I was 29, 7 months after the divorce was finalized, with money I saved over 3 years at the rehab clinic and a small inheritance from my grandmother Fern. Grandma Fern had left me $38,000, and I used $32,000 of it for the down payment. My parents had not been pleased. Beverly said the money should have stayed in the family, meaning it should have been split with Renee, meaning it should have gone to Renee, because Renee was the one who needed things, and I was the one who was supposed to provide them. I locked the car and went inside. The hallway smelled like carpet cleaner and old radiators, the permanent scent of a building that was trying its best. I hung my coat, dropped my keys on the counter, and stood in my kitchen in the dark. The brass key on my keyring caught the light from the street lamp outside. Grandma Fern had given me that key when I was 12 to a P.O. box she kept in Richfield. She used it for correspondence she did not want Beverly to see, which I understood now was its own form of self-preservation. The P.O. box was long gone, but I had carried the key for 19 years. Some things are just yours, Claire, she had told me, pressing it into my palm with her dry, lavender-scented hands. You do not have to share everything. I stood in my kitchen for a long time holding the key. The next morning, Saturday, I sat at my kitchen counter with coffee and the iPad and went deeper. Below the main chain between Beverly and Dennis, buried in the forwarded messages, I found an email Beverly had sent to a friend named Gail. It was dated November 5, 3 weeks before Thanksgiving. Claire is sitting on all that equity from Mom's money and she will not share. Renee's family needs a roof. Claire has 2 bedrooms and it is just her rattling around in there. It is selfish, Gail. She has been selfish since Joel left. I think losing the marriage made her hard. Selfish. Hard. Sitting on equity from Mom's money. As if the $38,000 Grandma Fern left me was community property. As if my grandmother's dying wish was a pot Beverly could reach into whenever one of her children needed bailing out. I read the email to Gail twice. The screen went blurry and I pressed my thumb into the corner of the iPad until the ache in my hand matched the ache behind my ribs. Then I started screenshotting. Every email, every forwarded message, every Zillow link. 12 images total. I sent them to my own phone through AirDrop, cleared the browser history on the iPad, and set it face down on the counter. My hands were steady. The training from my divorce was holding. When Joel had left, I spent 4 days organizing our shared apartment before I cried. I labeled boxes. I forwarded mail. I filed the dissolution paperwork with the Hennepin County Court. And on the 5th day, I sat in the shower until the water went cold and the sound of it covered whatever was coming out of my mouth. Confronting my parents was not an option. I had learned that from Joel, who twisted every direct conversation into evidence of my rigidity, and from Beverly, who had taken Joel's side during the divorce, because Joel was easier to sympathize with. Charming Joel, easygoing Joel, Joel, who just needed a little room to breathe, and whose wife made everything into a project. You push people away, Claire, Beverly had said, standing in this same kitchen 6 months after Joel moved out. Maybe if you were softer. I had swallowed that sentence whole. It lived in me still somewhere below the diaphragm, calcite hard and sharp-edged. I would not swallow this. I picked up my phone and typed into Google, "How fast can you sell a condo in Minnesota?" Tess Mahoney's office was on the 6th floor of a building on Marquette Avenue in downtown Minneapolis. The lobby had a Christmas wreath on the door and a security guard who buzzed me through without looking up from his phone. I took the elevator and the doors opened onto a hallway that smelled like fresh paint and copier toner. Tess was in her mid-40s with short gray-streaked hair and a handshake that communicated roughly 47 things, all of them competent. My divorce attorney, a woman named Carla who had handled the Joel situation with the precision of a surgeon, had recommended her. "Tess does property law," Carla had said. "She is fast and she does not ask unnecessary questions." I sat across from Tess's desk and laid out the situation. The emails, the plan, the timeline. I showed her the screenshots on my phone. Tess listened without interrupting, which I appreciated more than I could express because most people interrupted the moment they formed an opinion, as if holding a thought for 30 additional seconds was physically painful. When I finished, Tess leaned back in her chair and tapped her pen against the edge of her desk. The pen was silver. The desk was clean except for one stack of folders and a framed photo of a lake. "Your name is on the deed," she asked. "Just mine. No cosigner, no joint tenant, no partner on the mortgage. I bought it after my divorce. My own savings and my grandmother's inheritance. Joel was not involved." "Then your mother can want anything she wants," Tess said, and her voice had the flat certainty of someone reading a fact from a textbook. "The deed says your name. She has zero legal claim to that property. None." The relief I expected did not arrive. Instead, something heavier settled in a confirmation of two things simultaneously: that my mother had been planning to take something she had no right to, and that I was going to have to be the one to stop her. There would be no cavalry. There would be no family member stepping forward to say this is wrong. There would be me in this office making decisions. Tess told me about her own mother then. A lake house in Chippewa Falls, Wisconsin. Tess's brother had moved in for the winter at their mother's suggestion. Just until spring, the mother had said. 18 months later, Tess was $14,000 deep in legal fees trying to get him out. He had his mail forwarded there, Tess said, and something in her face shifted a tightness around the mouth that suggested the memory still had teeth. Established residency, changed his driver's license to that address. It became an eviction case instead of a conversation. By the time it was over, I had spent more on the lawyer than the property was worth in repairs. "How fast can I sell?" I asked. "If you price it right and we find a cash buyer, 3 to 4 weeks? Maybe less depending on the market. Late November into December is not peak season, but your neighborhood is strong. Minnehaha corridor sells fast. 3 to 4 weeks. Christmas was 5 weeks away." The math was tight like threading a needle on a moving train, but it was possible. I played along for a week that felt like a year and a half. Sunday dinner at my parents' house. Beverly made pot roast with the carrots arranged in a ring around the platter, which she did when she was in a particularly self-congratulatory mood. Renee brought the kids who ran through the living room trailing crackers and noise, while Todd sat on the couch scrolling his phone with the focused disengagement of a man who had perfected the art of being physically present and functionally absent. Beverly steered the conversation to Renee's apartment before we had finished the salad course. The cramped bedrooms. The broken radiator that the landlord kept promising to fix. The neighborhood that just was not safe for the kids. "Dennis, tell Claire what you read about that break-in on Renee's block." Dennis cleared his throat. "There was an incident," he said, which was Dennis's way of participating without committing to a position. "You should all come over for Christmas Eve," I said, and the words tasted like copper in my mouth, like biting the inside of my cheek. "The kids would love it. We can set up the air mattress in the second bedroom." Beverly's face underwent a transformation so quick and so complete that if I had not been watching for it, I would have missed the flash of triumph before the warmth descended. "That is a wonderful idea, Claire. Maybe we should bring some of Renee's things over early, get the guest room set up so the kids are comfortable." "Sure," I said. "Whatever works." Renee beamed at me from across the table. "Claire, seriously, you are the best." "I know," I said, and everyone laughed, and I helped with the dishes. While Beverly rinsed a casserole pan and I dried it, she talked about where Renee's kids could go to school in my neighborhood. She knew the bus route. She knew the school's rating on greatschools.com. She had already researched the enrollment deadline for January, which was 10 days after New Year's. My mother had planned the absorption of my home with the thoroughness of a military campaign, and she was briefing me on logistics like a general who assumed every soldier would follow orders. "Claire, You could probably move your desk into the living room, could you not? Beverly said, handing me a pot. The second bedroom would work much better for the kids without that big desk in the way. I could probably do that, I said. From the bathroom, I texted Tess. How soon can we list? She replied, in under a minute. Pam can walk through tomorrow evening if you are ready. Pam was Tess's recommended realtor, a quiet woman in her 50s with reading glasses on a chain and a measuring tape in her jacket pocket. She walked through my condo on a Tuesday evening while I sat on the kitchen counter and tried to see my home through the eyes of a stranger evaluating it for purchase. 2 bedrooms. Renovated kitchen with granite countertops I had saved 6 months to install. Hardwood floors original to the 1940s building. South-facing windows that filled the living room with light in the afternoons. 3 blocks from Minnehaha Park, Pam said, writing something in her notebook. That is gold. I would list at $315,000. The market in this pocket is strong, and a 2-bedroom in this condition with those windows and that proximity will move. My mother's Zillow estimate had been $310,400. My condo was worth nearly $5,000, more than Beverly even knew, and the smallness of that surprise mattered to me in a way I could not fully articulate. She had researched my life and still gotten the number wrong. Pam photographed every room while I packed a box of things I could not leave behind. Grandma Fern's china went in first, each plate wrapped in a dish towel. Then my occupational therapy degree from the University of Minnesota. Then, a framed photo of Fern and me at the state fair when I was 9, both of us holding corn dogs and grinning into a camera that Dennis was operating badly, cutting off the top of Fern's head. The brass key on my keyring caught the light from the kitchen window. I slipped it off the ring and wrapped it in a dish towel, then stopped. I unwrapped it and put it back on the ring. It was coming with me wherever I went. Some things are just yours. At work between patients, I had been checking my clinic's internal job board. Rehab First, our parent company, operated clinics in 12 states. A posting had gone up 2 weeks earlier for an occupational therapist at a clinic in Raleigh, North Carolina. Full-time. Benefits, starting in mid-January. I had bookmarked it, but had not applied. It sat in my browser the way a packed suitcase sits by a door, obvious and silent and waiting. The listing went live on MLS as coming soon the following day. I asked Pam to keep it off Zillow for now. The last thing I needed was Beverly's real estate alerts pinging her a notification that her daughter's condo had just hit the market. Over the next few days, I lived inside a split screen. At the clinic, I worked with patients. A woman relearning how to grip a pen after a stroke. A teenager recovering wrist mobility after a skateboarding accident. I guided their hands through the exercises, adjusted their positions, encouraged them through the frustration of bodies that would not cooperate with their intentions. And then I would drive home park outside my building and look up at the windows of a home I was in the process of selling. The 2 realities ran parallel and never touched like train tracks. Beverly called twice that week. The first call was about Christmas Eve plans. She wanted to bring her cinnamon rolls and a ham, and she wanted to know if my oven was big enough for both. I said it was. The second call was about bedding. She had found a twin bed frame at a consignment shop in Bloomington, and she wanted to know if I could help Dennis pick it up on Saturday. For Renee's kids. For the bedroom that would be theirs. Of course, I said, standing in my bathroom with the door locked, staring at my own face in the mirror. Happy to help. I did not help. I texted Dennis that I had a work conflict and he picked up the bed frame himself. By then, I had been to Pam's office 3 times and signed a disclosure form and reviewed the inspection report from the buyer's agent. The machinery of the sale was running smoothly and silently underneath the performance Beverly had scripted for me. The call came on a Thursday during my lunch break. I was in the clinic's break room, eating a turkey sandwich I could not taste, and staring at the poster on the wall about proper lifting technique. Bend at the knees. Keep your back straight. I had said that line to hundreds of patients. I was beginning to hear it differently. My phone buzzed. Pam, cash offer, she said, her voice even and professional. Young couple relocating for 3M. They are offering $308,000. Counter at $312,000. I said, and the words came out steady, which surprised both of us. 2 hours later, Pam called back. The counter was accepted. Closing date, December 22. 3 days before Christmas. I sat in the break room staring at the lifting poster. Bend at the knees. Keep your back straight. I had told patients that line 1,000 times, and it had never occurred to me that the mechanics of putting down a heavy load and picking up something new required the same technique. You bend, you brace, you lift from the legs because the back cannot carry it all. I excused myself and walked to the supply closet at the end of the hallway. I pressed my palms flat against the metal shelving fingers spread and stood there with the cool steel under my hands. The room smelled like bandage adhesive and antiseptic, and the faint rubber scent of latex gloves. A fluorescent tube buzzed overhead, in a rhythm that almost matched my pulse. I was going to lose my home. I was choosing to lose it, which should have made it different, but loss does not negotiate with your reasons. The condo was the first thing I had ever owned that no one else had a claim to. After Joel left, I signed the divorce papers and walked out of the courthouse and drove straight to the real estate office and asked to see listings. I needed something that was mine. And now I was selling it because the people who were supposed to love me could not look at something I had built without calculating how to disassemble it for parts. $312,000, closing December 22, 3 days before Christmas. The numbers were clean and final and real. I wiped my palms on my scrubs and went back to my patients. That evening, I sat on my couch in the dark and applied for the Raleigh job. The application asked for a cover letter. I wrote one paragraph. I am an occupational therapist with 6 years of experience in stroke rehabilitation and orthopedic recovery. I am relocating to North Carolina for personal reasons and am available to start January 15. I read it back. Personal reasons? That was one way to describe selling your home out from under your parents' scheme and driving 900 miles south with everything you own in 6 boxes. But it was accurate, and accurate was enough. I hit submit. The confirmation email arrived 30 seconds later. Your application has been received. We will be in touch. The following Saturday, Beverly arrived at my condo with Renee and 6 cardboard boxes stacked in the back of Dennis's SUV. We are bringing some of Renee's winter things over, Beverly had said on the phone that morning, her voice bright and practical as if my home were a storage unit she was entitled to fill. I buzzed them up. Beverly walked through the condo with the assessing eye of a property inspector, opening the coat closet and frowning at how full it was, running her finger along the kitchen counter to check for dust pacing the second bedroom, heel to toe and calculating dimensions with her hands. The way she measured fabric for her quilting projects. A twin bed and a crib would fit if Claire moved the desk out, she told Renee, who was standing in the doorway holding a box of winter coats. And we could put a shelf unit where the bookcase is. Claire, I have been thinking, and that desk really needs to go, Beverly said, turning to me with the brisk authority of a woman who had already decided. The kids cannot share a room with an office. You can work at the kitchen table. Renee's children come first. I could, I said. Beverly nodded and began directing Dennis, who had appeared with 2 more boxes, and the expression of a man who had long ago decided that compliance was less painful than conversation. He carried the boxes to the second bedroom without speaking. When we were briefly alone in the hallway, he said quietly, as if the words embarrassed him, "Your mother means well, Claire." I looked at him. He looked at the baseboard, which had a scuff mark from Renee's box. "I know, Dad," I said. "Aunt June is so happy you are doing this," Beverly called from the bedroom, her voice carrying through the apartment with the volume and confidence of a woman addressing a congregation. "I told her and Uncle Phil at church last Sunday. Everyone thinks it is so generous of you, Claire. Aunt June said she always knew you had a good heart." She had already told the extended family. The narrative was built and load-bearing. In Beverly's version of events, I had offered. I had volunteered my home to my struggling sister's family, out of the goodness of my heart. If I pulled back now, if I objected or hesitated, I was the one breaking a promise I had never made, betraying a generosity I had never extended. I made tea. I carried boxes. My jaw ached from 3 hours of clenching, and the muscles in my temples pulsed with a headache that would not fully arrive. Beverly had also texted a photo of my second bedroom to Renee's mother-in-law, Todd's mother, captioning it, "Renee's new guest room." I found that out later. Beverly was building an audience for her production, and every person she told was another brick in a wall between me and any version of events that did not end with my condo becoming Renee's permanent address. The following Tuesday, Beverly called to discuss furniture. She had found a dresser at a thrift store in Richfield that would be perfect for the kids' room, and she wanted to know if I could store it temporarily. I said I could. She also mentioned casually that she had given my address to Renee's pediatrician for records transfer. "Just in case they need to switch clinics in January," Beverly said. "Better to get ahead of the paperwork." My mother was transferring medical records to an address she did not own for children who did not live there on a timeline she had invented. The audacity of it was so complete it had circled past offense and landed somewhere near admiration. Beverly operated with the confidence of a woman who had never been told no by anyone who mattered. The message from Renee came on a Wednesday, 10 days before Christmas. I was sitting in Pam's office in Uptown, reviewing the final closing documents and initialing pages with a pen that kept running out of ink. My phone lit up with Renee's name. I let it go. I played the recording in my car afterward alone, with the engine running and the heat turned up until the vents blew warm enough to make my cheeks flush. Claire Bear, Mom told me you said it is fine. Todd and I are giving notice on our apartment this week. The kids are so excited. Lily keeps asking if she can have the room with the big window, and Aiden wants to know if there is a park nearby. You are the best sister ever. I know things have been hard since Joel and I am so glad we can help each other, you know? It is not even just about the apartment. It is about family being there for each other. Love you, Claire Bear. Love you so much. I played it again. And then a third time, because the third time was when the shape of the trap became fully visible. Renee's voice was bright and real and grateful. She was not scheming. She was not conspiring. She was a 28-year-old mother of two who had been told by her own mother that everything was arranged, that Claire had agreed that this was how family worked. Renee was giving notice on her apartment. In 2 weeks, she would have no lease, no backup plan, and no home, except the one Beverly had promised her inside mine. Beverly had built the trap with the precision of an engineer. Renee was the bait and the casualty at the same time. If I sold the condo, Renee's family had nowhere to go. If I kept it, Beverly won. She had arranged the board so that the only way I could protect myself was by hurting my sister, and the only way I could protect my sister was by surrendering my home. I sat in the car outside a coffee shop on Nicolay for 40 minutes. The windshield fogged over, and the outside world became soft-edged and blurry, which matched the inside of my head. A man walked past with a golden retriever wearing a plaid jacket, and the small, ordinary beauty of that, a man and his dog in the cold, caring enough about the animal to dress it in plaid, made something inside my chest split along a seam. I did not know was there. I called Tess. She answered, and I told her about Renee's message, about the apartment notice, about the trap. There was a pause. Then, Claire, you are not responsible for a situation your mother engineered. Beverly put Renee in this position, not you. If you do not sell, your mother wins. If you do sell, Renee is temporarily displaced but free of a scheme that was never going to end well for her either. Beverly was not giving Renee a home. She was giving Renee a dependency. She has 2 kids, I said. I know. That is why you are writing her a check and giving her resources. You are doing more for Renee in one envelope than Beverly has done in 28 years of supposedly helping. I did not answer because I was not sure Tess was right, and I was not sure she was wrong, and the space between those two things was where I was going to have to live for a while. That night, late after the clinic and after microwaved soup I did not taste, and after an hour of sitting on my couch staring at the wall, I stood in the doorway of my second bedroom. Renee's boxes lined the far wall, 6 of them labeled in Beverly's handwriting: winter coats, kids' clothes, books, toys, kitchen mist. The labels were neat Sharpie on masking tape, the same system Beverly used for everything. A child's sleeping bag was unrolled on the floor, purple with cartoon stars. On top of it sat Renee's daughter's stuffed elephant, a gray thing with one ear coming loose at the seam and a small purple bow stitched to the other. Lily had left it here on purpose. She was 4 years old and she was already nesting in a room Beverly had promised her. I picked up the elephant. The fabric was soft and smelled like grape juice and kid shampoo and something else, something warm and particular, the specific scent of someone else's child. My hands started shaking. The tremor traveled up my forearms the way it does with my stroke patients when they attempt to grip something too heavy for their current capacity. My knees folded. I sat on the hallway floor with my back against the wall, and the stuffed elephant in my lap and my breathing going thin and rapid, the shallow panting I recognized from patients in distress. In occupational therapy, we call it decompensation. The nervous system overloads and the body tells you what the mind refuses to say. My hands were shaking because they were holding the accumulated weight of the thing I had been refusing to name for 31 years. I did not have a family. I had an audience. I had been performing being their daughter, their sister, their good and reliable Claire, and they applauded when I gave and went silent when I needed. Joel left because I could not stop performing long enough to be a real person with messy needs and unpredictable feelings. My parents never wanted a real person. They wanted someone useful, someone who paid her own way, and had a spare bedroom, and responded to guilt the way a dog responds to a whistle. Beverly's voice clear as a recording. You push people away, Claire. I pressed the back of my skull against the wall. The plaster was cold through my hair. The hallway light was on one of those yellow overhead fixtures from the 1970s that makes everything look like a hospital corridor at 3 in the morning. Renee's boxes cast shadows on the floor. The brass key was in my pocket. I dug it out and closed my fist around it until the teeth bit into my palm. The metal was cold, warming slowly from my skin. Grandma Fern had hands that smelled like lavender soap and library paste. She had been a volunteer at the Richfield Public Library for 23 years, and she was the only person in my family who had ever looked at me and seen someone worth protecting instead of someone worth using. She died when I was 24. She left me $38,000, and Beverly never forgave either of us for it. I sat there until my breathing slowed, and the tremor left my hands, and the stuffed elephant's face blurred and came back into focus. Then I put it back on the sleeping bag, exactly where Lily had left it, and I stood up. My knees ached. The hallway floor was not kind to joints that had been folded too long. I picked up my phone and called Tess. She answered on the second ring, which told me she had been expecting this call or one like it. I am going through with it, I said. And I need to talk to you about a job in Raleigh. Tess's office on December 18 had a small artificial Christmas tree on the credenza, a mug of coffee that had gone cold, and a stack of closing documents on the desk thick enough to serve as a doorstop. We went through everything. Closing December 22. The cash buyer's financing was confirmed, no contingencies. My net after mortgage payoff, realtor commission, and transfer taxes would be approximately $118,000 wired to my account within 24 hours of closing. The clinic transfer approved. I had submitted my application to Rehab First's Raleigh location on the night of the dark night, as I was coming to think of it, and the response came back in 4 days. Start date January 15. I had a short-term rental lined up in Durham 20 minutes from the clinic month to month until I found something permanent. You have thought this through, Tess said. It was not a question. She was looking at the timeline I had written on a legal pad, each step numbered, each date confirmed. That is what I do, I said. She smiled, and it was the first genuine warmth I had received from another person in weeks that did not arrive packaged with an agenda, or a manipulation, or a request. I had written 2 envelopes. I showed them to Tess. The first was for Renee. Inside a cashier's check for $3,000, enough for first and last month's rent on a new apartment. Also a printed sheet with the number for Hennepin County's Housing Assistance Program and 2 affordable apartment listings I had found online, both in neighborhoods with parks, both accepting families with children. I had spent an hour researching those listings. Renee was not my enemy. Renee was a pawn who had been told she was a queen, and I was not going to leave her with nothing. The second envelope was for Beverly. Inside, printed copies of all 12 email screenshots, the full chain between Beverly and Dennis, the Zillow searches, the message to Gail, and a single paragraph I had written and rewritten 7 times until the words were as clean and hard as river stones. Mom, I saw everything. I am not angry. I am done. The condo is sold. The keys are on the counter. Renee has money to find a place. Do not contact me. Tess read it and set it down on the desk. Short, she said. Long enough. She nodded. It is. December 22 came in with a sky, the color of old concrete, and a wind that cut through every layer of clothing and found the skin beneath. I woke at 5 in my nearly empty condo. The movers had come the day before, a quiet 2-man crew, who wrapped my furniture in blankets and loaded it into a storage pod I would have shipped to North Carolina once I had a permanent address. They worked while Beverly and Dennis were at Renee's apartment across town, helping Renee pack her own boxes for the move that would never happen. The irony of that sat in my chest like a stone, too large to swallow, and too sharp to ignore my parents, packing their younger daughter's belongings for a home that no longer existed, while the older daughter they planned to displace was dismantling her life 30 minutes away. The walls were bare except for the nail holes. The kitchen counter was clean. The second bedroom still held Renee's boxes and Lily's sleeping bag and the stuffed elephant with the purple bow. I had not touched any of it. I drove to the title company on Washington Avenue. The roads were salted and wet. Tess was already there, standing in the lobby in her gray wool coat holding 2 coffees. She handed me one without a word. We sat in a conference room with a notary, and the title officer, a man in a blue shirt, who explained each document before I signed it. I signed my name 43 times. The notary's stamp made a sound each time it hit the paper, rhythmic and final like a heartbeat coming to rest. "The wire will hit your account by end of business tomorrow," the title officer said, sliding the final page across the table. "Thank you," I said, and my voice held, which I counted as a victory equal to any dollar amount. Tess walked me to my car. The parking lot was icy, a thin layer of black ice under the slush that made every step feel provisional. She shook my hand, and then unexpectedly put her other hand on top of mine, and held it there for a moment. Her fingers were cold from the coffee cup. "You did the right thing," she said. "I know," I said. And for the first time in weeks, I meant it without qualification or caveat, or the asterisk my brain usually attached to any statement of self-worth. "If Beverly calls my office, and she will, I will handle it," Tess said. "There is nothing she can do legally. The property is sold. The deed is transferred. She has no standing. She will try anyway," I said. "She will try," Tess agreed. "And she will fail. That is sometimes how it works." I drove back to the condo one last time. My parking spot was empty, except for my car, which was packed and ready. I went inside. The air was cold because I had turned the thermostat down that morning, and my breath was visible in the hallway, small clouds that dissolved before they reached the ceiling. I placed Renee's envelope on the kitchen counter, propped against the backsplash, where she would see it the moment she walked in. Then I walked to the front door and slid Beverly's envelope through the mail slot. It landed on the floor inside with a soft sound paper on tile. The last thing I did in that condo, I removed my condo key from the keyring and set it on the counter next to Renee's envelope. The brass key from Grandma Fern stayed on the ring warm from my pocket. My car held everything I was taking. 6 boxes in the trunk labeled in my own handwriting. Kitchen, bedroom, books, keepsakes, office, Fern's china. Everything I owned that mattered packed into 240 square feet of cargo space. I pulled out of the parking spot at 10:15 in the morning. The rearview mirror showed the building getting smaller behind me, the brick facade and the windows on the second floor that used to glow amber when I came home from late shifts at the clinic. I turned onto 35th Street. Then I merged onto I-35 South. Minneapolis fell away. The skyline, the IDS Tower, and the Fauché, and the cluster of glass buildings that caught the winter light disappeared behind a rise south of Burnsville. Then it was just highway and snow, and the flat white expanse of southern Minnesota stretching out in every direction. I passed Faribault and Owatonna, and the signs for small towns I had driven past 100 times on the way to Rochester or Iowa City, places that had always been waypoints on journeys that ended back home. This time the journey did not have a return ticket. I ate a granola bar from the glove compartment. I listened to the road noise, the tires on salt and asphalt, the occasional rumble of a semi passing in the left lane. I did not turn on the radio. The silence in the car was different from the silence in my condo, or the silence at my parents' table. This silence belonged to me. It was not waiting to be filled with someone else's demands or plans or disappointments. It was just air and engine and road, and I sat inside it the way you sit inside a room you have just moved into. Aware of the emptiness, but also aware that the emptiness is the point. It is space. Space is what I had been missing. The phone started buzzing around 4 in the afternoon. I was past Owatonna, approaching the Iowa border, when the screen lit up on the passenger seat. Mom, Mom, Mom. Then Dad. Then Renee. Then Mom again. Beverly must have checked the mailbox when she arrived at the condo to help Renee move in, which was what she had planned for that afternoon. She would have opened the envelope. She would have found the screenshots. And then the world she had constructed, the narrative she had built and furnished and populated with grateful characters, would have collapsed. I counted the calls the way I counted repetitions for my patients. 23 by the time I crossed the Iowa border. 24. The phone buzzed on the passenger seat with a persistence that bordered on violence. One text from Dennis Clare, "Please call your mother." One text from Renee, "Is this real? Mom is freaking out." "Where are you?" I pulled into a gas station in Albert Lea, the last town before Iowa. The pump handle was freezing and my fingers ached as I filled the tank. Inside the station, I bought a coffee black from a machine that had seen better decades, and I sat in my car watching 18-wheelers pull in and out of the lot while the sun dropped toward the horizon. I picked up my phone and looked at Renee's text again. "Is this real? Mom is freaking out." "Where are you?" The question marks punched through the screen with the energy of genuine confusion. Renee did not understand what had happened. She would not understand for a while, maybe not ever, because understanding would require her to see Beverly clearly, and seeing Beverly clearly would dismantle the architecture of everything Renee had built her life inside of. I typed a response. The check is real. I am sorry about the timing. You will be okay. I almost added something else. An explanation. A justification. A plea for Renee to look at the emails in Beverly's envelope and see what I saw. But explanations are a form of asking permission, and I was done asking permission from people who had never asked mine. I did not respond to Beverly. I did not respond to Dennis. Dennis's text sat on my screen like a small, sad monument to a man who had spent 30 years asking his daughters to accommodate his wife's schemes. Claire, please call your mother. Even now, even in crisis, his instinct was to redirect me toward Beverly, to manage her feelings, to keep the peace that was never peace, only silence. The coffee was bad, thin and burned and faintly metallic, but it was warm in my hands. I finished it, started the engine, and merged back onto the highway heading south. The winter sun sat on the horizon, low and orange and enormous, and the heater was finally working. For the first time all winter, the vents blew genuinely warm air across my hands and face, and I loosened my grip on the steering wheel. The brass key on my keyring caught the light. I drove. 3 months later, the dogwoods in Raleigh were beginning to bloom. I noticed them on my walk to the clinic. Pale pink clusters at the tips of dark branches, fragile-looking but persistent in a way that seemed personal. Minneapolis in March was still locked in gray ice. Raleigh in March was waking up. The mockingbird outside my bedroom window had been singing since early February, cycling through stolen songs from 5 in the morning, until I gave up on sleep and made coffee. My apartment was small, a 1-bedroom in a complex near the clinic. The walls were white, and the carpet was beige, and I had unpacked 4 of the 6 boxes. The other 2 sat in the closet with the tape still on, containing things I was not ready to decide about. Grandma Fern's china was in the kitchen cabinet, 2 place settings arranged neatly, and the brass key hung on a hook by the front door next to my new apartment key. At work, I had a new patient. A woman named Diane, mid-50s, recovering from a shoulder replacement. She was frustrated and trying not to show it, and I had worn that exact face for most of my adult life. 2 weeks of therapy, and she could not lift her arm past 45 degrees. She sat on the treatment table with her jaw set, and her good hand gripping the padded edge until her knuckles blanched. My daughter says I should just give up, Diane said, staring at the floor. She says I am too old for this kind of recovery. I adjusted her elbow position, guiding the joint through the range it could manage, feeling the resistance and the small give that told me the tissue was healing, even if the motion did not show it yet. You are not too old, I said. You are starting over. That takes different muscles than the ones you have been using. I had said that line to patients in Minneapolis, hundreds of times probably, but hearing it in my own voice in a treatment room that smelled like new vinyl and equipment cleaner, instead of old radiators, and 30 years of other people's pain, it landed with a weight I had not anticipated. The words were for Diane and for me simultaneously, and that was honest rather than contradictory. After work, I checked my email. Tess had forwarded something with the subject line, "For your information, no action needed." Beverly had told the extended family that I abandoned Renee. Aunt June, who had always liked me, had written to my old Minneapolis address, asking for my side of the story. Tess had received it and forwarded it along. I stared at Aunt June's email for 10 minutes, reading the careful sentences of a woman trying to be fair while having been told only one version. Then I wrote back. 3 sentences. Factual. I attached 2 screenshots Beverly's email to Gail and the Zillow search with Beverly's handwritten notes about installation timing. I did not ask for sympathy or understanding. The evidence could do that work without me. That evening, I walked home along the street that was becoming mine, past ranch houses and old oaks whose leaves were just starting to show green. A woman about my age was unloading boxes from a van at the curb outside my building. She had a toddler on her hip and a roll of packing tape clenched in her teeth. "Need a hand," I said. She looked at me the way people look at unexpected offers in unfamiliar cities, hopeful but cautious. "Seriously," I said. "I have a free hour and 2 working hands." She shifted the toddler and smiled around the tape. "If you grab that lamp, I will owe you my life." Her name was Andrea. She was a paralegal who had moved from Charlotte after a divorce. We did not exchange details about our respective endings. We just carried boxes up 1 flight of stairs and stacked them in her living room, while the toddler sat in a laundry basket and chewed on a wooden spoon. That is what choosing to be useful looks like when nobody is keeping score. When you help because you have capacity, and the person in front of you has a need. and nobody is documenting it in an email chain to be leveraged later. Andrea and I had coffee the following Saturday. She asked me how long I had been in Raleigh, and I said 3 months, and she asked what brought me here, and I said it was a long story that involved property law and family dynamics and a stuffed elephant. She laughed and said her story involved a husband who forgot which credit card to use at the hotel, and a paralegal who was better at discovery than he expected. We did not go deeper than that. We did not need to. Some friendships begin at the surface and build downward, and that was fine. That was more than fine. I ate dinner alone that night. Rice and vegetables and a glass of water at the small table by the window. The evening air came through the screen warm and soft and carrying the smell of cut grass and someone grilling on the balcony 2 floors down. I miss them. I hate that I miss them, but the body has its own ledger, and it does not accept explanations. My hands still reach for the phone on Sunday mornings, because Sundays were when Beverly called. The reflex has not faded even though the calls stopped in December and never came again. Renee cashed the check in January. I know because the bank sent a notification. She has not called or texted since the day I left. I check my phone sometimes, scrolling to her name in the contacts, looking at the empty space below it. There is nothing there. The people who are supposed to protect you are the ones who know exactly where to cut. They mapped you before you could speak. They raised you, which means they built the doors, and they know which ones do not lock. I think about Grandma Fern more now than I did when she was alive. She saw something in me that the rest of them could not see or chose to ignore, and she made a decision at the end of her life to put a wall of money between me and the system that would have consumed me whole. Beverly never forgave her for it. I used to think that was about the money, the simple greed of a woman who wanted to control every resource in her orbit, but I understand now it was about the principle. An inheritance Beverly did not orchestrate was an inheritance that proved Claire could exist outside the system. And if Claire could exist outside the system, then the system was not as necessary as Beverly needed it to be. I wonder sometimes about Renee's kids. Whether Lily will remember my condo, the big window, and the park down the street. Whether Aiden will grow up hearing I was the selfish one, the sister who sold her home out from under them at Christmas. Whether one of them someday in their 20s or 30s will stumble across the emails, or hear a version of the story that does not match Beverly's and wonder. Or whether Beverly has already deleted every trace. She probably has. She is thorough. There is a thing I tell my patients when they are struggling with a new exercise, when the tremor in their hands scares them and they want to stop. The shaking is not weakness, I say. It is your body learning a pattern it has never used before. The muscles are firing in a new sequence, and the tremor is the cost of building a circuit that did not exist yesterday. It does not mean you are failing. It means you are changing. Last week I bought a plant. A small fern from a nursery on Hillsborough Street. The woman at the register asked me if it was a gift, and I said no, it was for me. And the simplicity of that answer, the plainness of buying something green and alive for no reason other than wanting it in my apartment, made me smile in a way. I had not smiled in months. The fern sits on my windowsill where the morning light comes in, and I water it on Wednesdays because routines are the scaffolding I build my life around, and this particular scaffolding is mine. My hands are steady now. They were not for a while. The first week in Raleigh, I dropped a coffee mug and stood over the pieces on the kitchen floor for 10 minutes, not because I was upset about the mug, but because the sound of something breaking had become a language my nervous system spoke, fluently. But the tremor faded. The new circuit built itself one firing at a time the way it always does if you stay with the exercise long enough. I am on my apartment steps in the Raleigh evening. The air is soft and damp, and it smells like warm earth and charcoal, and that green sweetness of a southern spring I am still learning the rhythms of. A neighbor is grilling somewhere below me, and the smoke drifts across the parking lot in thin blue ribbons that dissolve into the dusk. I have a glass of water and a stack of patient files, and the brass key in my pocket warm from being held all afternoon. The mockingbird starts up again from the magnolia at the edge of the lot. It runs through its repertoire cardinal blue jay car alarm, something I do not recognize. It steals every song it hears, and makes them its own, and nobody calls it a thief. They call it resourceful. They call it adaptive. They call it the state bird. I am not healed. I am healing. There is a difference, and it is the most important difference I have ever learned.
Thank you for being part of Lyra Echo Stories. If this story stayed with you, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share, because every echo never truly fades.